Hello, dear readers. My name is Helen. Go grab a cup of tea, the softest blanket you can find, and let me tell you a story. This is Captain My Captain, Chapter 2, The Ocean Beauty. The thoughts were overwhelming Akira as she let the rock bite into her hand, drawing blood, but no noise escaped for the fear of the soldiers up above. Gripping the rope and starting the slow descent, her eyes couldn't stop darting to and fro as they followed so many trains of thought, all dominated by what Alto could have done to make a Teresian come out to such a small little island. She rather smartly decided to focus on the task at hand, as a fall to her death would dampen Alto's sacrifice. The cliffs behind the House of the Dead were free of foliage as the sun never fell onto them. It was a sheer cliff with a 50-foot drop to a broiling ocean below. Foam covered up house-sized, jagged, and cracked rocks as nature seemed to want to show off its more furious side. Just beyond the worst of the broiling sea was moored a beautiful sailboat. Two large white sails glistened in the sea breeze, with the hull covered in a pristine white with a striping of blue down the side. The deck was a pale oak and seemed to glow even in the low light. Akira voiced quietly as she examined it up and down from her vantage point. "That has to be at least 10 meters. It's going to be a stretch to be able to captain it." Deciding to worry about that later, she let the rope slip in her hands as she slowly lowered to the small ledge down below. The ledge was a stretch for one person to balance on it, and required nerves of steel to think that this was a good idea. By Akira's face, she didn't think this was a good idea. Yet she continued to propel down. Despite all the things that could and should have gone wrong, Akira's sandals touched down onto the ledge without incident. It was slick, but Akira kept most of her weight on the rope as she scanned her options. Option 1 was simply diving into the mostly seafoam ocean, and she would just have to hope a rock wouldn't be there. Option 2 would be to balance on the few visible rocks and hope a wave doesn't come slamming through. Moments passed as Akira's topaz eyes came clear as she focused, looking for something. A glint caught her eye as she moved her foot to the right, probing the air till it felt something solid, yet invisible. Option number 3. Magic. Alto was known to have never paid to house his fleet. He just hid them around the island out of reach of anyone who didn't have a boat already. And even if you did have a boat, that didn't remove the challenge of stealing from him, as he moored them in rough spots. No one even knew how he would get to his boats. Well, no one except Akira and her parents. They knew of the one spell he was good at was the Bridge of the Gods spell, an invisible pathway that could float and anchor itself anywhere if you kept concentration. The second that Akira confirmed the angle of the bridge, she darted forward, seemingly running on water towards the boat. Halfway, the rock started to become visible as the water was pulled back. Akira cursed aloud as she ran faster towards the boat, which visibly rose up a meter, pulling at its anchor, causing a whined echo from the stretched rope. The wave grew in the shallow shore, unimpeded by the bridge, and was picking up little pieces of rock and dead coral as if it was readying to impale the shore. At the sight, and very understandably, Akira groaned, "This is gonna hurt." As the wave crested above her head, she dived forward with a hope and a prayer, pulling herself as aerodynamic as possible. But it was futile. The wave consumed her and she was hit with a distinct feeling of her stomach dropping. The wave picked her up like a doll, and before a thought could even flitter across her mind, it slammed her down against the bridge and the rocks. The water twisted and spun around, scraping and pounding her against the rocks. Up, down, left, and right was meaningless. A hint of direction came as Akira's right hand brushed against something impossibly smooth. The bridge was to her right, and it wasn't underneath anymore. Gripping the edge, the friction finally let the wave move on. Black hair splitting the foam as the water pulled down. Salt water gushed from Akira's mouth as she sputtered, attempting to breathe. Not letting a moment go to waste, Akira flung her left hand over to grip the edge. The sea rocked slightly underneath her as she let herself have but just a moment to recover. A crash reached her ears as the wave pounded into the cliffs, and still more strength started to rush back out to sea. Terror flashed in her eyes before stealing into resolve. As the sea rose around her, she used it to propel back onto the bridge, starting her run to the boat. Water licking at her heels, yet nothing could make her look back. The boat bobbed downwards, and she pulled more into her legs as she just ran into the boat, crashing onto the deck. Salt water sprayed over her as pain spiked in her knees, but nothing could whip the mad grin off her face. Throwing her arms into the air, she sneered, "I did it!" The moment of elation crashed as hard as the waves as one thought popped painfully into her mind. The journal! Moving so fast, Akira pulled the journal from her bra where she had stored it to keep her hands free for the climb down. It dripped in her grip, but the spirits appeared to be on her side as she opened it to find the scribbled handwriting of the author still legible. Tossing the book next to the captain's station, she slogged to the controlling tiller. It took a moment for Akira to remember the list of to-dos before one should set sail. The old memories felt clunky and rusty, but still intact as all her childhood they were drilled in. A painful decision was made to ignore most of the safety components of this list, as if the soldiers above took off, they would see her and the boat in seconds. Pulling the rigging into position, she opened the sail as the anchor clicked into its housing. White-knuckling the tiller, Akira pulled it hard to port so the boat would face the waves head-on, as they didn't care that she had made it. The rudder, just barely visible in the foamy water, responded to her pull, and the boat began to face the waves. Exhilaration filled Akira to the brim, despite herself, as the boat responded to her command with precision. Cresting over the waves, the cliff's shadows were quickly passed in the wake of the boat. The sun started to bathe the hull and deck in a white glow, and the name glistened in the light. The Ocean Beauty. Locking the tiller into place, the need to look back at the island that had been her home pressed on her. Thumbing the journal's drying edges, Akira's eyes started to bud with tears as she finally let herself turn to see the island, sitting on the rim of the hull to watch its sinking figure. The only thing in view was the House of the Dead and the curve of the island that just hid the town from view. Finally, Akira spoke to the wind. "Damn it, Alto, if I had known." Thoughts turning back to him, only one thing could come to Akira's mind now. What would become of him? Fish darted and schooled beneath the boat as it passed over the coral reefs, hundreds of fish of all different colors swirling like an intricate dance. The memory of sailing on these waters and bow fishing with Alto and her parents almost overcame her, but she stubbornly squashed the memory down. Hours passed and the sun started its descent to meet the sea, yet Akira remained in her vigil watching the spot that the island had been in, but it had long since disappeared as if sinking into the sea. She tried her best to ignore the alarm bells ringing in her head of all the things that she should do before the light of the sun disappeared completely. It took her own stomach growling before she was willed to move, looking like a slouched fish as she made her way into the hull. Following the narrow steps leading into the cabin, instinct made her fumble on the dark wall for a light switch, and shock lit her face as she found one. The lights flickered on and illuminated the ornate interior. Red velvet covered the seats that lined the right side of the cabin, while the left was dedicated to a kitchen with all the fixings. A stove swayed slightly in a gyro too loud to be kept upright. It was neighbor to a small fridge that was covered in the same white oak of the deck. There was even a sink, but a sign was posted above it in Alto's shaky handwriting. "No wasting, you only have a 20-gallon tank." Akira gasped as she opened the fridge, feeling the cool air inside fall across her bare legs. Slamming it shut, she ran back out onto the deck and looked atop the cabin roof to see solar panels set into the wood. Alto had never used electricity before. The copper cost alone would have made this ship triple the price. The boat's slight imperfections started to show. The whole deck was white oak, but the slats closer to the cabin looked worn and sun-bleached, while the wood to the edge of the boat looked freshly milled. The paint of the hull was all white, but spots had looked like dust had worn into the paint. Rushing back down into the cabin, Akira picked up on even more oddities. The velvet seats were so new they almost glowed, but the carpet puffed with dust at the slightest movement. Knowing Alto, Akira went to the captain's bed positioned in the bow and saw the start date scribbled onto the set headboard of the bed. April 13th, 2001. It was a month before the boat festival that had sealed her parents' fate, yet the completion date that still looked wet was September 18th, 2013, which was just yesterday. Sinking back with the info, Akira asked aloud to no one as she furiously rubbed her fingers through her knotted hair. "Why did you finish it now? How long did you know about the draft? But the adventurer just died yesterday, giving you this idea. What the hell?" She ended the question with a scream. Stomping back to the tiller, she snatched up the journal and vowed to read it back to front. It had to have the answers, but as she sat cross-legged reading just the first page, her face went from determination to confusion to the face that a child would make at hearing a lesson about the importance of eating broccoli. The first page read as such: "The first day of my most grandiose adventure that shall be spoken of for decades, millennium to come. All shall know the name of Diedrich Go-Getter, and none shall make a fool of this most heroic name again. Log of my first day. It was the most grand. A seagull joined me and the captain. I think I shall name him Francois for my brother. Oh, how proud he must be of this very moment." Akira doled as she looked back to the sea with the journal in her lap. Why is this written in Teresian? And honestly, did Alto give me the wrong journal? Resigned to her fate, Akira pressed on reading about how Francois the seagull abandoned them, and how dejected that made Diedrich. But then Francois came back, then abandoned them again. But then he came back. Then he abandoned them once more. But then he came back looking quite dirty, so dirty in fact that his feathers turned gray. That was the straw that broke Akira's concentration as she came to the painful realization that Diedrich couldn't tell seagulls apart, and Francois had never returned. Akira couldn't help but mumble to no one. Diedrich's confusion was almost understandable until the bird changed color. Remembering her stomach again, Akira checked her heading and speed to make sure that the ship would sail without running aground, and made her way into the interior. Alto had hidden the freezer behind the stairs and had it stocked to the brim. It had to be a 50-cubic freezer, and with the passive-aggressive note that he had left, it was the most insulated freezer ever made by shipbuilding kind. It allegedly could stay cold for days after losing power, as long as Akira kept the lid shut. Popping a strip of beef into a pan with a pat of butter, she cooked in some fresh vegetable medley, all in the same saucepan. She smirked as she remembered Alto when she was only 5, passionately debating with her mother on how they only needed a saucepan and a pot. No need for anything else, just one saucepan and one very large pot. The stove teetered and tottered in its swinging gyro as Ocean Beauty tackled the waves with grace. Despite knowing that she shouldn't, the second her food was done, she left the journal behind to watch the last of the sun disappear below the waves. The sparse few clouds glowed pink in the fading light, while a lilac purple painted the sky. Yet the sun basked the ship in a fading orange light. Sitting crisscross on the forward mast, Akira glanced at an island just to the left of the ship on the port side. It was smaller than Gem Bluey and seemed squatter in appearance. It was the last island above the waves in the island chain, and Gem Bluey's sister. It was known to sailors as Thieves' Point. She couldn't remember the last time she heard of thieves actually being at Thieves' Point. An old lighthouse was barely visible in the fading light. The salty air and waves had worn it down to the rock, only a few spots of plaster persisting at the top of the tower. Akira let her eyes linger on the structure, sadly not remembering what it had looked like in its heyday. As the island disappeared from sight, the last of the sun's light started to disappear as well. Darkness blanketed the ship before the sky lost all of its color. It faded to a cobalt blue before sinking to a midnight black. With the stars shining like diamonds, they twinkled into life above Akira. A bright star with a red-like glow shimmered into life, and Akira, without wasting a second, changed the boat's heading until the forward mast matched up with the star perfectly. A weird phenomenon, the North Star. Every world had an incredibly bright star that dictates north, yet no one knows why the consistency. The day finally started to compound on Akira's mind and body, a heavy weight settling on her shoulders as she set the tiller once more, feeling almost robotic as her heart threatened to burst. With a painful realization, she cried out into the night as she choked, "Sorry, Granny. I'm not going to be able to watch the Treasure Princess with you." Thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe, and come back soon.